So good evening, folks. As you will probably have noticed, I am not Ben of the Unlucky Frog. My name's Ian McAllister. I'm from the Giant Brain website and Brainwaves podcast. I'll be your compere for the evening. With me is Ralph Horsley, Andy Hepworth, and John Hodgson, and I'll just get them to introduce themselves and what they've done in the world of tabletop art, starting with Ralph.
Hi, I'm Ralph Horsley. I've worked as a freelance illustrator for best part of 30 years. I've worked on Dungeons & Dragons, Magic the Gathering, Pathfinder. I've worked with Games Workshop. I've worked with all the major publishers really over the course of my career.
Right.
I'm Andy Hepworth, and I guess I started about 20 years ago doing a little bit of work for Games Workshop and Chivalry and Sorcery, and more recently a lot of work for White Wolf, and I've been art directing for Calliope Games for almost 4 years now. So,
cool. I'm John Hodgson. Been working about the same length of time as Andy, actually about 20 years. I worked on Warhammer Historical for a very long time. I was creative director at Cubicle 7 for a long time. I worked on games like The One Ring. What else were people known for? Dragon Warriors, I did the covers for that. And loads of different things. Yeah, Dungeons and Dragons I've worked on. Pathfinder, similarly. So yeah, that's me.
Great. So we've got some questions that were submitted by folk over the last sort of couple of months. So we're going to go for those first. Then we'll open up the floor to some questions. And if no one has any, I've got a few of my own that we can ask. And I believe the guests have brought along some questions for each other as well. So, gents, just whoever wants to go first. Do you think that sort of everyone is capable of producing the kind of artwork that you see in sort of board games and role-playing games? Is it something that anyone can do, or is it need a sort of particular style?
I don't know whether you necessarily a particular style, but like anything, there is a craft, there's a skill set there. So to say that anyone can do it, I think is probably a bit misleading in that, you know, my son who's only 12 certainly couldn't do the same sort of work that I'm producing. But to say that there's opportunities out there for a whole range of abilities and a whole range of people, I think is true. And that's one thing that I do like about the games industry. It is in some ways a hobby industry, and there's also a spectrum from people self-publishing or semi-professional publishing. Sure. There's a whole range of business type models out there and publishing type models, and within that there's obviously scope for different types of artwork and people with different experience levels. I mean, when I started out, I'd do practically anything for practically any amount of money, you know, just to get the experience. And part of that was just being asked to, rather than just sitting and drawing what I wanted to do at home, was someone saying, you need to draw a guy fighting a monster for this cover or for this particular product, and just having that discipline of having to fit a format and fit a deadline and do these other things. That's how you grow as an artist. So in that sense, it's open to everyone. But yes, you need to work and develop the skill set.
John or Andy, anything to add?
Yeah, just that, you know, obviously there is, as Ralph said, a huge spectrum, but I think you could work almost any style into a product as long as your sort of vision is clear from the outset. As an individual illustrator, you know, you level up and you work very, very hard on your craft, but you know, from the sort of side of the table, the opposite side of the table, when you're art directing, sort of the look that you're going can often be a very specific, off-the-wall thing, which isn't necessarily a high craft illustration. That's the wrong way to word that, but yes and no.
Yeah, I think I was going to come at this from sort of the top end and the bottom end, if you like. So right now, you know, we're publishing, my company Handiwork Games is publishing a series of games illustrated by my two sons who are young. You know, they keep changing their age. I wish I'd keep it still. Rory was 9 when he illustrated The Forest Dragon by Roy age 9, and his brother was 7. So but it's a very specific thing that is aiming to be the thing it is.
Yeah.
So, I think certainly there is, as board games get bigger and bigger and bigger, it can bear a broader range of styles, which is great, good. So it should. I think at the other extreme, and this is a little bit maybe technical and industry, there are a lot of people trying to be, say, board game illustrators who have a style or a portfolio that isn't suited to illustration, is perhaps more suited to something like concept art and speed painting and so on, who maybe mistake certainly role-playing games illustration is perhaps easy and easy money and don't do as well in the long run because it's not easy and it's not something you can just toss off in between other jobs if you're going to do well at it. You can certainly there's a lot of that about. But I think there are, within professional illustrators, there are some people that are better suited to certain types of games illustration than others.
Yeah, I mean, that leads quite nicely onto the next question that was submitted, which is, do you think that there are certain styles that just, like, point blank, are not suitable for, like, well, most of your sort of RPG illustrators, so particular styles that aren't suitable for RPG illustration in particular?
I think it's a bit of a depends answer.
Yeah.
I think you could make a very good fist of almost any style as long as it was consistent and intentional and properly art directed. And a lot of that will come down to the art director, actually. Because I was, I'm trying to think of something ridiculous. We go, of course, potato prints would be wrong. No, they wouldn't. Not if it was a game that was, suited that style. If it was a game about, we were just talking before that we started recording. I spent some time in Finland recently, and the Finnish LARP scene covers incredibly diverse topics. It's absolutely inspirational stuff. And I could see, literature for, say, a Finnish LARP about, I don't know, a play group or something would not be an unusual topic for that to cover. So therefore, potato printing would be better than getting Jeff Easley to do it. That it would look a bit out of place. I suppose that's a bit of a cute answer. I'm trying to think. I did have a thought about something that wouldn't be appropriate. But it's gone now, so you guys take over quick while I try and recover it.
Well, I think the point you're making, though, isn't it? It depends on the product. And that's the nice thing, certainly here, looking around all the board games. And I'm a board game player myself, and certainly looking around the stands. A lot. I suppose the key thing is that the artwork has got a function. It's not just there to be decorative, although that might be part of the function. It's there to add something to that product, or to sell that product, or to tell you something about the game world or whatever else. So it's about matching those two things together. So as John says, if it's about a play group and it's potato prints, that matches. If it's I don't know, I saw a board game I was looking at earlier, which was about making patchwork quilts. Well, obviously that's going to require a different art style to if you're doing some samurai battle game or something. So that is really what's important here. Is not that one art style trumps another. It's that art style works with that product in some way to enhance that product. Because ultimately, being an illustrator isn't just about making a nice picture. It's about making a nice picture that works to sell that product, sell it both in terms of it being commercially viable, but also sell the idea of what that thing is. So for me, a lot of the work I've done has been role-playing game book covers, and you're selling what's happening within that supplement. So if you buy this supplement, it's going to be about going into a city and exploring a city and all the weird things that might happen there, or it might be about going into the forest and fighting owlbears or whatever it is, and that tells you something about what the characters are in the game that you might play, what the setting is, what the world looks like. And those things are all part of the function of art within that context. So that's really how, from my mind, these things have to work.
The only thing I think I'd add to that is, there's a core group and broad style similarity to, the mainstay of fantasy game art, or game art, I should say. And if you're making the potato print game, it's hard to find the best potato print artist out there. And if you're that artist, finding your, the market for your art is not always as easy. But then again, if you're part of the 70%, you're competing with the rest of the 70%. So
I was going to add as well, I think you're absolutely right, Andy. I think there's an element as well that we often don't hear a lot about, that's the influence of, say, distribution on a game, and that kind of feeds into I like we're using the potato print game. If you make the potato
I think that's going to
game,
hold you
make
for
it
some time.
that.
Make it now.
You need to make it now, John.
You will pay a cost. I mean, I suppose I'm talking more from the position of publisher. You will pay a cost for making the potato print game if you say want it to go into Target in America. They will have, and the distributors that serve them will have certain criteria that they would prefer to see, and you may not do well with a potato print game. I reckon you could if you did it right. I don't think it's, but it would be a harder sell than something a little bit more mainstream. And then you're just deciding what your return will be depending on the style you go for, and whether you can live with that, and that's what you want to do, you know.
I suppose as well, looking at it from an artist's viewpoint, if you choose, say, because a lot of people, especially when you start out, think they'll be very hungry on what their style is or what their style is going to be like, and that's something that naturally evolves. But of course, you've got to be mindful of the companies you want to work for. And I've seen that even within my own career. I've worked for Magic the Gathering over the course of, gosh, how long now? Must be, well, nearly 2 decades or something I've worked for Magic the Gathering. And even during the course of my career with them, I have seen that my employability within that company, within that brand, rise and fall depending on what they do. When they do certain sets and they want a more graphical style that lends itself to the work I do, then I get more work. When they've moved towards a more cinematic or concept art style, my work tends to drop off because I'm more in that first bracket. So if you choose, as an artist, if you choose an art style that is a potato print, then you're saying, I'm excluding myself from a lot of potential work out there. If you choose, as Andy said, a more mainstream style, or you're more flexible within that style, then you're giving yourself more job opportunities. Part of going out there and getting work is telling an art director that you can provide what they want for that product. And you're selling yourself and saying, look, you're taking a chance on me. You could go to an artist you're already employing, and you know what they're going to give you. But if you want to hire a new artist, I've got to somehow, in my portfolio, suggest to you that I can deliver the same, or actually ideally better than that you're already getting from them. And it's how you go about doing that is the challenge, maybe. And part of that clearly is adopting a style that it isn't copying someone else necessarily, but is certainly within the same broad remit as that.
You know, I feel very defensive about the potato print game now. Like, weirdly, I feel like, in my heart.
Well, you can come back to Tabletop Scotland next year, 2020 release from Handiwork Games.
It's something I was going to say, this is like uber specific, but when I think back to, say, Ralph, you were talking about Magic and stuff, and I was thinking back to when Dungeons & Dragons 3rd edition was kind of the thing. And I can remember very clearly, I've known Ralph for years and years. This is not going to be like super intimate story. I've already oversold it. I just spit it out, John, for crying out loud. So I remember the sort of style they were looking for was very well defined, and I think your work fits it really well, Ralph. And you also, I remember we were all trying to get there almost, and I think you did really well at it. And conversely, I came to learn it wasn't what I could do well. And I'm very cautious when I say it wasn't what I wanted to do, because that sounds like you're going, I didn't want to do it anyway. I blooming did. I really, really wanted. And I did a bunch of gigs on D&D 3rd edition. But ultimately, I found I was incredibly self-conscious when I was making the work. It wasn't my best work by a long way, because it just didn't suit me. It was really high action, a lot of sort of American comic book influence in there somewhere. I just can't do all that. And I started to realize what I wanted to do was something very different, and the people I was looking to in terms of artwork were not doing that. And actually that was the making of me when I gave up trying to be something that I wasn't any good at and relaxed a little bit into and tried out doing stuff. That probably led me much more in the direction of getting the work on the One Ring, and that took me a very long way, by stopping trying to do the high action stuff and looking back at people whose work I really admired, like, John Howe, Alan Lee, that stuff. I didn't see them doing loads of action scenes, people leaping around and that kind of stuff that 3E wanted. And I think there's 2 ways you can go. You can flex your style to match and do really, really well, or plow your own furrow and do well at that. However, often we know plenty of people who make the wrong choice and maybe a bit too easily give up being flexible and try and reject what they're asked to do, which I think can be a big mistake. It's a really tricky one, that about when you should bend without breaking, break without bending, that sort of stuff. Yeah. And everyone's got to find their own way through that.
I think it's difficult, but I think ultimately you've got to try and do the best work you can do.
Yeah.
On any project you do, you've got to try and do the best work you can do, and do do the best for yourself, really. And hopefully that will reap its rewards, because people are looking for quality. ultimately,
Mm-hmm.
and, you know, and quality does shine through.
Yeah, it's quite difficult to find your voice sometimes, and not you're not usually conscious of it. I don't think. I think your style and your voice, for want of a better word, just largely develops over time. You either choose jobs which send you down a certain road, or match your style to the jobs which you are getting. But yeah, it's a difficult one. That
It's
And
hard.
it's an
I
evolution.
can't sort of
yeah.
track when I started doing work like X. I'm sure there's a grade into doing that, and then a grade out the other end as I get interested in something else. And
Yeah, and I think
do
that's
that.
healthy as well, isn't it? I think you've got to be evolving. I think that I'm sure we've all, certainly for myself, I've although I can sort of objectively sit back and think I'm better than I was 10 years ago, it doesn't necessarily feel like that when you're doing it. Because the more you know, the more you don't know. It's a weird thing. I know that when I think, because I'm self-taught and I did a degree in English and literature and librarianship of all things, and during the course of that I decided I didn't want to do that. I wanted to be an artist, and I was quite active in doing fanzines. I had some stuff published in a role-playing magazine, and thought, great, I could do this, I could be an artist. If I actually knew how bad an artist I was at the time, in objective sense, I probably would have never done that. I would be a librarian now, but thankfully that ignorance served me quite well. That ignorance and stubbornness served me quite well, really. But even now, I'm continually critical of what I'm doing and evolving, and hopefully and I can see my style has evolved, not just in terms of some of my anatomy. My understanding of anatomy is better, or my drawing is better, but also what I want, how I want to express my art, and what I think works better for me qualitatively has changed.
Yeah, wow, that's really interesting. It keys into something that me and Andy were talking about in the week. There are many people on the internet who will take their children's drawings, and they're a professional illustrator, and they turn it into like a real monster looks like it's from D&D or a comic. And now I really hate that. Because the kids' drawings are always better by millions of multipliers than the sort of commercial pap that the well-meaning real illustrator does. Just ruins these kids' drawings that are by far so much better. And I was saying to Andy, I said, like, either I've reached a new understanding of what I like in artwork, or I've just my brain's just crashed into a ditch. It really has, and I don't know. It remains to be seen. I mean, for me, it was discovering Core Block, who illustrated a lot of Tolkien's work, and it is nothing like, say, the movies. It is very symbolic. It's not trying to be well drawn in inverted commas. It's quite childlike, and I just love it. And I think his illustrations are fantastic. Tolkien loved them, actually. He says, lying himself with Tolkien's taste.
But that's
doing a call to authority. But Tolkien agrees with me. Yeah.
On that point, I mean, certainly for me, one of the biggest influences growing up was Dungeons and Dragons, and I know that following this seminar now, there's going to be the screening of Eye of the Beholder, the Art of Dungeons and Dragons, and of course, first edition Dungeons and Dragons art. A lot of the artists there, they were just hobbyists. They if we go back to, does any art fit a product? Well, a lot of them weren't very good artists, and I think objectively you can sort of look at that and say it's not great art in a qualitative sense. Like the anatomy wasn't necessarily great, the line work wasn't necessarily great, but what they were telling narratively was really strong, and it sold that game, and that's what I wanted to emulate. I didn't want to go and emulate Rembrandt or something. I wanted to go and emulate this guy doing this line drawing in the monster manual of a rust monster, because that was what was exciting to me, or the gelatinous cube or whatever it was. That's the exciting stuff.
It's got that sort of mad energy, hasn't it, that I respond to really strongly, that stuff. Even though you might not know that from, if anyone even knows what my work looks like, you might not know, but just again, it's something to come back to a lot. It's the sort of love that's in it, is just beams out of it, and the enthusiasm, I think, is really important. And it's really, I've seen, the tides turn all the time, but for a while, I think in our field, there was an enormous push back to almost like classicism and very academic drawings, and people in the States were setting up ateliers to draw plaster casts, and I was like, I hate this stuff. I hate, I did, Ralph sent you librarianship and English literature. I did a fine art degree. I'm trained as an abstract painter. I wasn't trained as I went to art school, but I didn't do sort of life studies and all that kind of thing. I, very much more contemporary art stuff. And I find much more excitement in a lot of what you're talking about than maybe that real push to be good art with a big capital A that doesn't necessarily, I mean, it's great, well done, those people that can do that stuff. That sounded really patronizing. I also meant to say, and of course, the Eye of the Beholder movie that's showing later, which Ralph is in, which he won't mention, is,
Yeah, that's half eight. Half eight, is it? Yep. Yeah, so about half hour
really good.
After we finish up here.
Really, really good. It's well worth watching. I saw it in the week and was really inspired by it, actually. It really reminded me of a lot of stuff, that's really exciting and cool. And Christopher Burdett is in it, a mutual friend of ours, and he's really, I love, again, just crazy energy and enthusiasm, and everyone in it is very good. But
maybe that is key. Maybe that's one thing that is great about this industry we work in, is that people are enthusiastic and passionate about it, and and like you were saying, people that maybe artists that are just sort of think, I'm just going to do it on the side, but really I want to be a concept artist for movies or something like that. For me, I'm actually very happy to be in the place I'm in, where I'm producing artwork for role-playing games and board games and card games. I don't want to go off and do movie concept work. That might be cool in its own way, but to be honest, I actually really like the space I'm in. I like this industry. I like this environment. I like the work I get given to do. I get to do really fun, interesting things, that you wouldn't do if you're doing, like there was certainly for a while, I think it's moved on from this, but there's certainly a while, like any fantasy book cover seemed to me involve someone cropped off from the waist upwards. It looked like it's photo reference to hell, and there was with a castle in the background. And it's like, I don't want to do that. I want to do someone leaping around fighting an owlbear. That's more exciting to me. That's where my passion was as a teenager or whatever. That's why I got into doing what I'm doing now. I don't want to get a couple of models in and put a cloak on them and some costume I've got and take a nice photo and then replicate that photo on a book cover and put a castle in the background. That's not where my art's at. Much as that can be amazing and look great when it's done well.
And that's quite the nice thing about working in board games and RPGs. To a large extent, most of us are hobbyists ourselves, and we love the medium and we love games and we presumably play games. And this segues quite nicely into the question which I had prepared earlier.
I've got another one from Submitted, but go ahead, please.
I wondered what the games were which sort of either kept you in the hobby or inspired you to kind of pursue game art as a career.
Great question.
Well, for me, it's easy. It was Dungeons and Dragons straight off. There's two. I quote two major influences really on my art development, because I'd always drawn and whatever as a kid. I drew whatever, probably knights and military stuff. I was quite interested in that sort of military history type background and things. But there's two key elements. One was last year at primary school, I had a teacher who was very good at reading the story at the end of the day. And one of the last stories he read to us was The Hobbit. And he did it brilliantly. And he did a wonderful Gollum. And he had this huge Adam's apple, which even now I can picture bobbing from down. It did like Gollum. And he did this amazing sort of, And I was quite a precocious reader, which is probably why I did English literature and librarianship. And I read The Lord of the Rings. I must admit, I struggled with the last book, but it brought me into that world. And then a couple of years later, my best friend got basic Dungeons and Dragons for a birthday present. And then that was it. You could play in that world. And seeing those illustrations and later getting Advanced Dungeons and Dragons, the first edition, and seeing the artwork in that and playing in that game world, my drawings were just of my role-playing characters and the things we'd done on a weekly basis. So it was my character, whatever, the barbarian fighting the goblins, or there were these narrative stories. I just do page after page. It was almost like comic book sort of narrative stuff, and then playing Dungeons and Dragons fed in. And to me, it was a career high when I ended up working on Dungeons and Dragons, and then for fourth edition, doing work on the Player's Handbook and the Dungeon Master's Guide, the Monster Manual, looking back and thinking, God, this 12, 13-year-old kid living in Kendal in the Lake District in the middle of nowhere, to suddenly be working on this thing. It was quite a step, and I still get a kick out of thinking that happened, and I'm in this position now.
For yourself, John?
Definitely similar story, but Dragon Warriors, which is the sort of
Yeah.
UK classic dungeon bashing game. Really, really loved it. Got it at school book club. Loved the artwork, an enormous amount. Leo Hartis in particular, his work. Never mind the covers so much, but what was inside the pages was just brilliant. Real typical British fantasy storybook fairy tale stuff. I just thought it was really amazing. And just sort of dittos Ralph's story, because I ended up working on the second edition via James Wallace and Magnum Opus Press, and that was absolute joy to get to do it. And again, you're like, what? Actual Dragon Warriors.
Yeah, it's a great
Really,
cover.
really
That
cool. Yeah, it was good. It was really, really nice to get to do it. I'm trying to think of stuff that's maybe still keeps going. I mean, we still play D&D now, which is cool. Our own sort of weird version of it. I have to be very careful, because we're working on some D&D projects now, and I'm like, wait, is this like the way we play it or actual D&D? And it's never actual D&D. I don't think of anything else really good. I mean, board games have been a really interesting, the rise of sort of Euro board games. I won't go on about it too much because it's a real sort of cliched story, but just those kind of experiences and the sort of diversity of experience that you can get from board games has been really important. And being able to play with my kids and stuff has been really, really cool. So, yeah. What about you, Andy, since you asked the question?
I was going to say,
Now I've got an essay prepared. For No,
I didn't know
two-line
to answer
essay.
your own questions.
Yeah.
I'm not ready for that one.
Specifically asking.
No, D&D was the one which kind of hooked me into the hobby originally, but I think it was Vampire the Masquerade which kind of showed that a game could be something else and something different, and the art, just as I was finishing high school, like Tim Bradstreet's art really kind of struck a chord with me at the time, and like you guys as well, getting to work on Vampire, Changeling, Werewolf, Exalted, all all the White Wolf games, and now the Onyx Path games, was just it's all downhill from there afterwards.
Well, I'll come back to the submitted questions for a moment, then we'll come back to Ralph and John with the questions they prepared. The last one here I've got is, we've sort of touched on it a little bit with like sort of different art styles and that kind of thing, but how do you ensure that the art or graphic design you're working on is sort of sympathetic to game's sort of mechanics as well as sort of its setting? Is that something that's ever in your briefs as artists?
No, not well. I think it certainly helped, say, working on Dungeons & Dragons, having played the game. I think it helped inform my art, not necessarily in terms of the mechanics, in terms of what you need to roll to hit something on the D20 or whatever, but in terms of, okay, well, if you're an adventurer, you're going to have your rope and your 10-foot pole and your scroll cases and all that. So it's going to inform it in that sense of
Sure.
And that's something I've always enjoyed with the Dungeons & Dragons work. And I think 3.5 especially, the later editions really, I think, played on that a lot more, where the characters really looked like they had all the kit that you would have on your character sheet. So you would have multiple pouches and you'd have your potions, because that's what the players would have, and I think the art reflected that. So in that sense, that's true. Something like a lot of the time, of course, you don't know what the mechanic is. I mean, I've done a lot of work on Magic the Gathering, and there they specifically won't tell you the mechanic, because they're really strict on how that information gets out, and they're probably the strictest non-disclosure agreement I've worked with is Magic the Gathering, and they're very close on what information they give you. But you can sometimes maybe work out what the mechanic might be. If it's a blue spell and it's about time or something like that, you can maybe think what it might be, or it's a black spell and it's something to do with undead or graveyards or something like that. You could think what the mechanic might be, but really, to me, it's more about giving a narrative or giving a feel of what that setting is and what the game is. So as I say, it's not so important about you need a 16 to hit someone on a D20. It's more like what's the character going to look like? What's the feel of that type of character? What's the feel of a blue spell or whatever within Magic? That's more for me what it's about, less about the specific mechanic.
For yourselves, Andy and John, anything to add?
I'm trying to think if I've ever had a brief which has explained, the dice mechanics of what what I'm supposed to be illustrating. You very often have to illustrate the specific effect of a spell rather than the mechanics of it. I don't really think it's often been an issue. Or maybe once in Exalted, you can combo all of your spells or crafts, whatever you want to call them, in a row. So they wanted somebody attacking and parrying at the same time, which is not an easy thing to do. I probably failed hideously to do it, but the brief was probably a movie scene of somebody rolling along the ship deck, killing 2 people and then parrying the third, or something like that.
One of those easy briefs that we all like.
Yeah.
I suppose I'd sort of cheat a little bit in that, because I've done a lot of art direction. I think that more comes under art direction than what illustrators are supplied with, and the art director is kind of intermediary to translate what's going on in the rules, or at least in the text, to then supply that to the artist, so the artists don't need to know almost, and they can concentrate on just the content of an illustration. You don't often get a lot of freedom to do that interpretation as the illustrator, but it certainly is your job as the art director. And I've done a lot of work where I was art director artist, or lead artist is a more common term for that. Certainly on Tolkien stuff I've worked on, it was really important to dig down with stuff that was not literally in the text. Funnily enough, it's handy that I talk a lot to people, because there was another conversation this week about sort of melancholy in Tolkien. Someone said some very kind things about my work I'd done on the first edition of The One Ring, and melancholy and that kind of stuff that was never specifically in the text of the game, but it is absolutely a big theme of Tolkien, and small characters in big landscapes is something that I'm kind of known for doing, and I think being able to feel your way through that is really important. There's a couple of paintings that I personally really like that I made for The One Ring that I won't really be able to do radio ventriloquism and describe, but because they'll just sound rubbish in words. Because I think that's when work is good, because you can't, sum it up in a few words. But there's one I did of a sort of, it's like golden hour. There's some rather melancholy-looking characters setting up a campsite, and it's the golden hour sort of time, very golden light, and they're all a bit wistful, and it's all about passing time and stuff. And I think that stuff is where that's what you're sort of aiming for, if you can. In a way, it's easier with Tolkien if you can operate on that level, because his themes are quite easy to grasp. I don't know what those themes are in D&D. I don't know if D&D has those fighting and shit. Excuse my French, it's probably, but it's great to work on something where you get those kind of themes to more I suppose more literary themes to key into is very helpful, and I certainly tried very hard to do that.
Sure.
I think that's maybe the point, isn't it? It is more about themes and moods and things like that.
Yeah.
So if you're working on Warhammer, I've done quite a lot of stuff on Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay over the past years and the latest edition, and the mood there is about it being grim and dark, and everything's a bit doomed anyway, and everyone's a bit messed up, and everyone's a bit ugly, and a bit dirty, and that's what you're trying to convey, that sort of feel. I suppose it goes back to what I was saying earlier about the art matching the product, and you're trying to give a narrative and tell people about the world. It's less about this is a percentage-based game, or this is a D20-based game, or D6 or whatever. That's in a sense is less interesting function of the art. You're telling people about the feel or the style of the game. That's what I think anyway.
There's a funny mentioning Warhammer Fantasy Roleplay, the latest edition. In the core book, I didn't touch your covers particularly, Ralph, other than pre-press work, but there isn't a single illustration in 4th edition core book that didn't cross my desk, and I added like splatters onto of just dirt on everything. Absolutely everything I worked on, every single illustration, to add more dirt and like texture to it. Every single piece was passed through across my desk to have more splatters. I've got about 6 different splatter brushes that provide dirt on everything. Particularly, I hope you don't mind me saying it, particularly Andy, because Andy does some beautiful sort of clean work. I'm like, this needs more.
Never working for him again.
I know. Just a lot of dirt was added, and I suppose that's in line with that, that kind of stuff.
But there isn't a mechanic for dirt in the game, is there?
No.
There should be, maybe. I don't know.
Sort of baked in. So Andy's had his question to the other. So John, what's yours?
that's
Well,
segue.
I was going to. Can I put my
Yeah,
question? 'Cause
okay.
it, sort of
Fair.
it follows on a
Well,
little
so
bit.
does mine,
Sure.
but you can go.
Yeah.
It might be the same question.
It might be the same question. Well, I think it will be. Anyway, so the both of you have already touched upon this, that you yourselves, of course, both came from sort of freelance or whatever backgrounds, but you now, in different ways, have functioned as art directors or have worked as art or are working as an art director. And I suppose the question I wanted to ask was, how do you see that's impacted on your work? Has it changed your attitude to the illustration work you produce yourself? I'm just curious to see, what influence that's had, because clearly there's one thing for me. I've never worked as an art director, so I'm always used to receiving an art brief or whatever and having that interaction. I've learned how to manage that in my own way or my understanding of what the expectations of the art director has. But you've been on both sides, so you've had to write that art brief and you've had to manage artists and assess their work in terms of, well, I suppose in terms of a number of criteria. And has that then impacted back on how you've looked at your own work and how you've changed your approach?
Go on, Andy.
He's thinking. It's
Lots of
too
time
much.
to think.
Too many caveats in there, wasn't it?
I don't think it's affected the way I would approach painting or drawing an image. I think it might have affected the way I react to criticism. And you learn quite quickly that that there's a bit of give and take. Once you've delivered an illustration, sometimes they want more black in it, or something changed very slightly. Sometimes they want big changes, but it's made me. I shouldn't say this.
Don't say it. Don't say it.
Yeah.
Don't say it.
It's made me more willing to just go with all the changes.
I don't think that's a bad thing. I think that's a
Yeah.
positive thing. I think that's
Yeah.
something that I've certainly felt that. Well, anyway, I mean, I'm not going to answer the
Yeah.
question for you, but I certainly feel that's
Uh-huh.
a more professional attitude, isn't it?
I mean, you've got to be ready to make some changes, but the art director is middle management. He's getting it from the guy above him, and it all flows downhill in a way. So he's got to coach the verbals he's getting from the top to the guy that he's hired and he's dealing with, and try and make that as palatable as possible to the artist. And the guys who just say, and girls, sorry, yeah, I'll do it, are amazing. Yeah.
Yeah, I think I suppose there's a few. It's quite a complicated question. I definitely was really shocked how little contact time when I became an art director I had with artists. As an artist, I foolishly thought most of the job was talking to artists, and sometimes I had frustrations that art directors didn't spend more time communicating to artists. Why don't they just spend more time explaining things? You just don't have it. It's like 10% of your time is in contact with the artists, and the rest is a middle management position. It's quite tough because you are, spinning a lot of plates and trying to please everybody. I think I got a rude awakening to how I was very strong on kind of supporting the artist community, which hopefully I still am, but like artist rights in the workplace and so on. I tempered that a great deal when I discovered how flaky an enormous proportion of freelance artists are, and I was shocked and really saddened by it actually, and could no longer engage in quite the same fierce way I had before, fighting for people when I discovered how flaky people could be. And you're not keeping up your end of the bargain to demand greater things. And that was a big disappointment to me, actually. But it also, I had some questions about how I had got as far as I had got with my own understanding my quality that is not as high as that. Like, either of you two, right, are both better draftsmen than I am, absolutely. But because I just turned up and did the work, that's the skill. I never understood that. Yeah, turning it in, being polite, replying to things, meeting deadlines. I never questioned it really. I just did it because I thought I heard it was really important to do it, so I did it. But that is not very it's not uncommon. And I mean, certainly, I don't want anyone who works for me to think I'm talking about them, because I don't work with people that don't meet their deadlines or that I'm not happy with, Pat, if you're listening, it's okay that you're like 2 weeks late. But there's certain artists that I will brief knowing they're going to be 2 weeks late, but they're worth the wait for, because the work will be worth it. And I know they're 2 weeks late, so I don't give them the real... I always give them the very important real deadline.
We can edit that later.
It was interesting you say that, John, because I remember several years back having a conversation with an art director at Wizards of the Coast, and I like you, I always thought that there were certain things you were meant to do as a professional artist. You were meant to do things on time and do what the job asked of you. And she said to me, I look for there's 3 things I look for from an artist, and as long as they can meet 2 of them, I'm going to keep hiring them. And so the 3 things I look for is they can meet deadlines, they can produce good quality work, not just they do what's sufficient, but they can raise the bar, basically. They can do good quality work, and third, that they're easy to work with. And at the time I thought, well, okay, I meet deadlines, and I think I'm easy to work with. And hopefully I can get the other one. And she kept hiring me, so Yeah. But I was shocked that she didn't expect that was enough for her, really. That you were easy enough to work with, and you met deadlines, and you could produce. Obviously, you couldn't be rubbish, but you just had to meet this minimum bar of quality.
Yeah. Meeting deadlines is so valuable as an art director.
It makes a lot of work for you, doesn't it, when you have to reschedule everything, or you miss a print slot, or what have you. I mean, that's kind of on the art director. If you miss a print slot, maybe that's a bad.
And also, like you're saying, something I think I've come to appreciate throughout my career is that when you first, maybe someone says, okay, we don't want that goblin to look like that, can you give it bigger ears or a longer nose or whatever the criticism is. First, I think lack of experience and maybe being a bit thin-skinned, you think, but I really like that goblin how it is. I drew the best goblin I could do. That nose is just perfect. Why would you want to change it? But then you realise, actually, as you say, but their criteria isn't necessarily because they didn't think it was a brilliant nose and it wasn't a well-drawn goblin. It's just that, but our goblins haven't got noses like that. To fit in our style guide, they need bigger ears. They need more spikes. They need more dirt on them or whatever it is. And so you realise, actually, what I'm doing, it's not a criticism of my art, although that may be in there, but really it's saying we're trying to mould it so you fit what we want for the product. So again, it comes back to what I'm saying. The art has got to complement the product. If my goblins don't look like Dungeons and Dragons goblins, then it doesn't fit the product. They can't use them. So it's not a criticism of you've drawn a bad goblin or something. It's just like, it's not a Dungeons and Dragons goblin. And also the other thing I suppose is important is you're realising that art director is actually taking a chance from hiring you. Their job is on the line. So if they hire artists and artists produce rubbish work or are late or whatever, as you say, there's a chain here. It impacts on them. They aren't then doing their job. So actually you're potentially getting them to lose their job. So there is a knock-on chain effect. And that's something I realised is a maturity thing of like, well, it isn't just about me and my ego and my art or whatever. It's actually, I'm now, albeit as a freelancer, working with that in the company, and there's a chain effect. Obviously if I do a good job for this art director, their boss likes them, and so on and so forth. And that first thing of trying to be hired by an art director for the first time, of course they're taking a huge chance. Why wouldn't they stick with artists they know that they are going to just, okay, they might not be brilliant artists, but they're going to keep giving them what they want. They're going to be easy to work with. They're going to meet the deadlines. And you're saying, take a chance on me. You've never worked with me before, but I'm worth that risk. And that's a big investment for them, Thankfully, a lot of the products I've worked on, they demand a lot of artists. I mean, Magic the Gathering has, card games, there's 100 plus artists working on any particular edition of that at any particular time. Dungeons and Dragons, certainly, they had, when they're producing a supplement, 2 supplements every month or something like that. There was a huge demand for art. So there was a lot of scope to get your foot in the door. But it's getting your foot in the door in the first place and then delivering, isn't it? So I've gone a little bit off topic there.
No, I do know. I really, anyone listening who wants to work as a fantasy illustrator or a gaming illustrator, a really simple tip is name your files appropriately. And if you are asked to do it in a certain way, just do it that way. Because I worked out once, there was one point I was working on sort of 4 to 5 books a month, each which had a minimum of 30 illustrations, more like 40 to 50 average. And if I have to spend time renaming each file, even if it only takes me 30 seconds to double check I'm renaming it correctly across that many, say four times, 120 pieces of artwork, and I'm spending 30 seconds renaming each one, that's an hour a month renaming files, and I'm sort of not here on this earth to rename other people's files. that stuff really drags on you, and so people that can just turn it in the way you asked, it's not a big ask. So just, that is a really practical tip, to just name your or at least if you can't do that, name them in some sort of sensible way. Don't send me stuff with like Final 21, It's like, yeah, thanks, great. I have a lot of files called that too. I don't send them to anyone. You rename it. Yeah.
So, John, let's go to your question then.
So my question,
then we'll have a little bit of time for questions, will we? 5
minutes. I'll do my question is a stupid question, so I can just, I feel very ashamed that you've both thought up very sensible questions.
We knew you'd lower the tone.
Is it to do with Potato Prince again?
Yeah, no, it's not. Anyway. So both Andy and Ralph have worked for me as an art director, with me as the art director. So who, and you don't have to name names, who is your favourite art director you've worked for and why? It's me, isn't it?
It is you, John.
Yeah, it is.
Well, look, I mean, it is a silly question because, of course, I've got the advantage that I've known you for a long time, and we knew each other when we were both freelancers and both starting out our career. And I think you've got. So we've had lots of conversations over the years about working within the industry and what that entails. So I think when it came for me to work with you, and I was, appreciative that you felt my work would fit the products you were hiring for. It wasn't a case of being a friend of yours. That was the, I suppose at the core of that was respect for your professionalism, that you would only hire me if you felt I was appropriate for the product, and that fed into the rest of the relationship. But also, I suppose because you did know my work over a number of years, that I felt I had a lot of freedom within that. So yeah, I'll give you credit. You're not. There are other art directors that have been very nice. One thing
I was only joking about
I know.
me.
One thing I would say that's interesting, especially this has been true with a number of the art directors I worked with at Hasbro, Wizards of the Coast, was that forming a good relationship with an art director is key, because those are the people that give you work, and not every art director. So there might have been, I don't know, at one point, say there was 6 or 7 art directors working on Dungeons & Dragons, but maybe only 3 of them were hiring me. It wasn't because I wasn't appropriate for Dungeons & Dragons, but maybe some of those art directors preferred my style to others. And also, some of them wanted to keep certain artists, because it's like, well, I've got Ralph Halsey working for me. I don't want you to have him. So you get there's a weird office politics you can get not engaged in ideally, but you can get involved with. And also I found that certainly there was one art director, she no longer works for Wizards of the Coast, but Mary Kolkowski, and she was a key art director for me. She gave me some of my first work on Forgotten Realms, and I worked with her a lot on Forgotten Realms, but then she moved. She did miniatures. She was doing Dungeons. So suddenly I was doing miniature designs for Dungeons & Dragons. She moved somewhere else. I was doing that because she kept hiring me, because she liked work, because I ticked those boxes. I was easy to work with and met deadlines, and she felt I could do these other things. So actually forming a good relationship with an art director is key, because you'll tend to follow art directors around. I've done the same thing. When I first started working on Magic the Gathering, Jeremy Cranford was the art director. He hired me. I worked with him. He left that company. He went to work for Upper Deck for a while. I forget, they were doing the World of Warcraft trading card game. Yeah. I went and did World of Warcraft trading card game with Jeremy Cranford at Upper Deck. He left Upper Deck because, anyway. Upper Deck was interesting to work with them at the time. And he went and worked directly with Blizzard, who were then doing the World of Warcraft trading card game, and then latterly Hearthstone. I worked on Hearthstone because Jeremy Cranford was the art director. So basically I had a good relation with the art director. I've moved with him, and that went with those different products. Hopefully, along the way, I'd worked on, Magic. He went and left Magic, but I had already got my foot in the door. So then when Jeremy Jarvis took over as art director, I was still working on Magic, but I'd also now working on the World of Warcraft TCG. So that's a healthy working relationship for me.
For yourself, Andy?
Again, I'm not going to name names because they're all good, and some of them aren't. But no, the art directors who.
What are you laughing at?
My own ineptitude, John. The art directors who trust you and who hire you because they know that you can do a job and give you a brief and let you get on with that job. And as an art director as well, the artists who I know are going to come through for me are, that's the other side of the coin. And John was one of those art directors. He knows why he's hired me. He asks me to do a specific set of things, and then he puts extra textures on them.
Yeah, and then I repaint it. I just repaint it myself.
Yeah.
And don't tell you until now.
So we've got a few minutes left. Has anyone got any questions from the floor? If you do, please come up to the microphone that's at the front here and speak into that. Anyone?
Everyone's shying away from it.
Yeah, I
It's
was going to say, like,
opposite
if you don't want to come up to the microphone, you can speak from your seat, and I'll
we've got
repeat
someone
it
good.
because that's pretty harsh.
I wondered if any of you have any thoughts on female representation in fantasy art.
It's not very well represented on this panel, is it? Female representation.
That is true.
I was quite shocked to turn up to another sausage fest of a panel, but there we go.
That's fair.
Yeah, I mean, we did. Sorry, I could also answer the question. I could listen. Yeah, I did a really enjoyable series of panels at Gen Con with Nicole Lindreys of Green Ronin and Rich Thomas from Onyx Path about gender representation in fantasy art, and we did it 2 years running, and it was really good. And all of us on the panel, I'm not a massive, I don't know if you guys heard us talking before the event, I'm not a massive fan of this sort of we sit up here and you guys sit down there and you're to listen and we talk. I'm not a massive fan of that. And in these talks, we just really took opinions and observations from the floor, and it was really great. I learned so much from that, which is really great. And I mean, I've always tried since, hopefully, if you're aware of what I do, I try to include as many people as possible. I came up with the catchphrase that Cubicle 7 is still using, but everybody's invited to the fun, which I think is very important. I really want very strong reasons why people are not invited. If there is, oh no, we can't have that, I want to know why, because it's like the great strength of fantasy and tabletop games is that absolute nonsense, and that's what I really like about it. So you've got to have some very strong reasons to not be inclusive of what you do. You can run into problems. I mean, I could talk all night about some of the practical problems. There are some old men running things still who are difficult to get around. I had some problems with things I made on games I don't want to mention the names of, where the old man who has the money or is in charge of, say, a license goes, oh, why isn't she prettier? And you're like, really? Like, is that still a thing? But it is there are, I think we live in a time where different generations are coexisting with very different ideas.
Yeah.
So I'm getting really forthright. I'll shut up now.
No, I think it's really important. I think that is something that, not just women, but representation in general, because that's something you're doing, as an artist. You, as I say, again, it goes back to what you're saying about the product. If all you're doing is putting on white European men on the front cover, you're basically limiting that, aren't you? And the trouble is, of course, that's what I am. I'm a white European man, and you tend to, especially with artists, you tend to draw yourself, or you tend to put yourself in there. And I am very happy to say that a number of companies, and I think Wizards of the Coast have been quite a leading company in this respect, have been keen to push that, and have been keen to get rid of those old tropes of the chainmail bikini, which I've always hated. I think it's awful, and I think it's awful that is still associated with fantasy art. And I'm glad to say I think it is growing up, but it's still that is still there. That is still there. Yeah, unfortunately.
Yeah, the representation is getting better. I played a lot of fantasy flight games, card game Netrunner, and the art team there were really good at lots of different representation. Just incidental art. There was just the parents of this child and his parent happened to be same sex, and it was just totally not mentioned. It's just there. That sort of stuff was just in the background of their art, and it was great to see. All sorts of sort of ethnicities and sexualities being just represented.
I certainly do feel that responsibility, and I do sort of tick myself off sometimes when I've done a cover or something. You realise, well, wait a minute, I haven't included people. I haven't put a woman on there or something, and it's like, okay, yes, I have got that awareness. So I don't always live up to my expectations of myself. Yeah. I suppose.
When I first joined Calliope Games, we had Cassidy Werner working for us. She moved on to Cheap Ass Games, and she's moved on again, and I can't remember where she's gone. But she was really adamant that all the guys in the team sort of broke out of their automatic reactions and automatic, stereotypes, and it opened my eyes, I must say, So, but I think the industry is much better now than it has been. I'm sure there's still a long way for us to go, but
I think it has moved away from that pin-up art, hasn't it? Which I think was all pretty awful. But I also am aware there's a lot of male artists I've spoken to them, they're out there, that they I think in a bit of a perverse way, get off on doing that art. Which, you know...
Yeah, I was always really confused by that because I found it like, it was... When it comes to like adventure games, D&D games, board game stuff, I don't really know what that's got to do with it. That really sexualized stuff just isn't part of like stabbing up goblins and getting gold and stuff. And now it's sexy time. And you're like, I just don't really. Yeah. Well, it's a teenage fantasy, I suppose, you know. Yeah. But I've forgotten what I was going to say. Yeah, someone else carry on. I can't remember.
We've probably got time for one more question from the floor if there's anyone who wants to ask anything. Ooh. Coming out from behind the box.
The sound guy asking a question. So we had a hobbycraft panel this morning about painting miniatures. Is there any sort of overlap in skill between doing what you're best known for in terms of like painting conventional art on canvases and painting miniature models?
Well, when I started out, as I said earlier, my inspiration was Dungeons & Dragons first edition, and it was black and white line work, and that's what I did for a long time. But at the same time, parallel to that, I was a miniature painter. And I got to a point in my career where colour printing was coming in, and I realised actually, to get where the money lay, it wasn't in interior black and white artwork, it was in colour covers. And I had to teach myself to paint, basically. But all I had done at that point was miniature painting. So I had a lot of miniature paints, and that was really where my first painting. So there is an overlap in that sense, and that my first paints were, I did most of my Dungeons & Dragons work using little miniature paints.
It's really funny
because I worked for Games Workshop and I got a staff discount in the local shop, so I got them at half price. and I was just, that's what I use. Going and get artists acrylics were more expensive, and there was nothing wrong. Actually, they're really quite good miniature paints because they've got a really good level of opacity and a really good level of consistency. And I know even now Wayne Reynolds still uses them.
Yeah, I was going to say, so I used to work in it.
So in terms of, I suppose maybe what you're saying technically, yes, learning to mix paint and do that technical side of it, clearly there's an overlap. If you can mix colours, which you need to do and you can do blending as you do on a miniature, then clearly that's what you're doing on a painting. You're mixing colours, you're blending colours and also you're trying to create a three-dimensional effect because you're having lights and darks. You're creating form, and that's something you're doing maybe in a more stylised way with a miniature. But then, I think that's shown if you look at my early work, then I think I was, in a sense, taking miniature painting and making it 2D. Because, that was the way I did form in a way that maybe I don't so much now.
I was just laughing there because I used to work in a comic shop where Wayne Reynolds used to buy his comics, and you used to come in, Ralph, to buy your comics.
Yeah, Leeds was the hub of Dungeons & Dragons.
I don't know what was in the water in Leeds, and I always tell the story that I always used to really timidly think up of, like, the best question I could think to ask you guys. It's like, one, because I didn't want to be that guy pestering you. But all three of, Kev, Wayne, and yourself would come into our shop to buy miniatures paints for your, like, Dungeons and Dragons art. So, yeah, there is totally a crossover. Yeah, I started painting. My first sort of, use of colour and stuff was, painting miniatures, definitely. Yeah. And then, then I did all this sort of proper painting stuff in inverted commas. But, yeah, definitely crossover. And I still enjoy it. I still love painting miniatures.
Yeah, I'm painting them even now. I've got them on the go, yeah, definitely.
Likewise, yeah.
I love a miniature. Yeah.
For me, it's something that I could do creatively. I think I've realised to sort of help prevent burnout. It's good to do creative stuff that isn't commercial. It's not work. And part of that for me is painting miniatures and do stuff like that because there's no financial application. I can't sell. Well, maybe someone would buy Ralph Horsley painting miniatures, but that's not the point. They're there for my personal pleasure, and they're being creative, and I could do them in front of the TV when I'm chilling out at the end of the evening. Whilst the minute I sit down and draw, instantly I'm thinking, oh well, should I put this on Instagram? Should I put it on my web shop? Even if it's just a doodle, there's that other stuff around it. For me, miniatures frees me from all that. So it allows me to be creative in a non-work way.
Great. Well, thanks very much, Ralph, Andy, and John, for spending time with us and answering our questions.
Thank you.
So this has been recorded all night. This will be up on the Unlucky Frog Gaming site's podcast site, and it'll be up on Tabletop Scotland's site sort of in the next couple of weeks after the column, once everything's been edited together. There's going to be, as we mentioned earlier, there's going to be Eye of the Beholder showing in here in about 20 minutes or so. Awesome. Thanks very much for coming, everyone. Thank you.